What if the greatest prison you have ever lived in was not made of walls, but of thoughts? This is the central message of the book, The Power of Now, by Eckhart Tolle. This book does not try to teach you something new. Instead, it asks you to unlearn what your mind has been doing for your entire life. Eckhart Tolle explains that most human suffering comes from one simple mistake: living everywhere except the present moment. The mind is constantly moving. It jumps to the past, regretting what happened, or it rushes into the future, fearing what might happen. And while the mind is traveling through time, life is happening now. Eckhart Tolle shares that for many years, he himself lived trapped in his mind. He suffered from depression, anxiety, and constant inner conflict. One night, overwhelmed by pain, he realized something shocking: I cannot live with myself. This single sentence changed everything. It created a question: who is the I? And who is the self? In that moment, his identification with his thoughts collapsed. There was silence, and inside that silence, peace. This experience became the foundation of The Power of Now. From this awakening, Tolle explains a key truth. Time is a psychological illusion. The past exists only as memory. The future exists only as imagination. The only moment that is ever real is now. Example from the book. When you feel anxiety, you are not afraid of the present moment. You are afraid of something your mind imagines might happen later. Real life example. You sit safely at home, yet your body is tense because your mind is replaying an argument or predicting a problem that does not exist right now. According to Eckhart Tolle, this is how humans create suffering without realizing it. Eckhart Tolle explains that to understand human suffering, you must first understand unconsciousness. Unconsciousness does not mean a lack of intelligence. It means identification with the mind. When you believe every thought, every emotion, every inner voice, you are unconscious. From this unconsciousness, the pain body is born. The pain body is emotional memory, stored in the body. It is pain that was never fully faced in the moment it appeared. As children, we often lacked awareness. As adults, we often lacked courage. So emotions were pushed down. Anger was swallowed. Fear was avoided. Sadness was hidden. Shame was buried. But energy cannot disappear. It accumulates. Over time, this accumulation becomes a separate force inside you. Eckhart Tolle describes the pain body as almost a living entity, not a physical being, but an energetic pattern. It has its own momentum, its own preferences, its own survival instinct. The pain body wants to be felt, but not healed. It wants expression, not awareness. This is why it seeks situations that recreate pain, arguments, drama, conflict, self-sabotage, anything that produces emotional intensity. When the pain body is active, it distorts perception. You no longer see the present moment clearly. You see through the lens of past pain. Neutral events feel threatening. Silence feels like rejection. Distance feels like abandonment. Example from the book. A simple comment feels like an attack. A delay feels like disrespect. A boundary feels like betrayal. The present moment becomes contaminated by the past. Real life example. Someone cancels plans. The fact itself is simple, but the reaction is deep sadness or anger. The pain body connects the moment to earlier experiences of loss. Eckhart Tolle emphasizes that the pain body strengthens through resistance. The more you resist feeling it, the more powerful it becomes. This resistance often appears as distraction, addiction, overthinking, constant activity. But avoidance feeds pain. Awareness starves it. The moment you stop escaping and simply feel what is present in the body, a shift occurs. You notice sensations without interpretation. Tightness, pressure, burning, heaviness. You stay with the sensation. You do not explain it. You do not judge it. You do not turn it into a story. This is crucial, because stories belong to the ego. The ego uses the pain body to maintain its identity. Eckhart Tolle explains that the ego and the pain body form a partnership. The pain body provides emotional energy. The ego provides narrative. Together, they create a false sense of self. The ego says, "This pain means something about who I am. This pain defines me. This pain justifies my reactions." The ego feeds on roles: victim, hero, failure, success, survivor. Every role requires a story. Every story requires time, past and future, never now. This is why the ego resists presence. Presence dissolves roles. In presence, there is no victim, no enemy, no past identity, only awareness. Example from the book. When someone insults you, the ego wants to react, to defend its image. But when you remain present, there is no image to protect. The words lose power. Real-life example. You receive criticism. Instead of collapsing or attacking, you listen, not to agree, but to remain conscious. The ego weakens. Eckhart Tolle explains that the ego fears silence. Silence reveals that it is not real. That is why the mind fills every gap with noise, thinking, judging, commenting. But beneath the noise, there is something else. Stillness. This stillness is not empty. It is alive. It is awareness itself. As awareness deepens, the pain body has less space to operate. It may still arise, but it no longer takes over. You notice it earlier. You feel it fully. You allow it to pass. This is emotional maturity, not suppression, not expression. Presence. Tolle emphasizes that awakening is not dramatic. It is subtle. It happens when you stop believing that your suffering defines you. You realize pain arises, pain dissolves, but awareness remains. This understanding changes how you relate to emotions. Fear becomes a sensation. Anger becomes energy. Sadness becomes movement. None of them are you. They move through you. And as this understanding stabilizes, the pain body loses its grip. The ego loses its authority. What remains is a quiet strength, a grounded presence, a sense of being that does not depend on circumstances. This is not the end of challenges, but it is the end of suffering. As identity, Eckhart Tolle explains that the present moment is not something you enter. It is something you stop leaving. Most human beings are almost never here. Their bodies may be present, but their attention is elsewhere. In memory, in anticipation, in imagination. The mind constantly says, later, when this happens, when I get there, when things change. But life never happens later. It happens now. Presence means allowing your attention to fully inhabit this moment, not as an idea, not as a technique, but as a lived experience. Eckhart Tolle emphasizes that presence begins in the body, before thought, before interpretation, before judgment. You feel your inner body, the subtle vibration in your hands, the aliveness in your chest, the quiet energy in your feet. This anchors you in the now. The mind may still think, but it no longer controls you. You are rooted in being. Example from the book. When you bring awareness into the body, thinking naturally slows down, not because you force it, but because attention has moved elsewhere. Real-life example. You feel anxiety rising. Instead of analyzing it, you feel your breath, your shoulders, your heartbeat. The anxiety loses momentum. Eckhart Tolle explains that the present moment is always manageable. It is the future imagined by the mind. That feels overwhelming. You can always deal with now. Now is simple. Breathing, listening, seeing, feeling. Problems exist only in time. Presence removes time. This does not mean you stop planning. It means planning no longer defines you. You plan when necessary. You act when required. But you do not live there. You live here. Another key teaching is conscious acceptance. Acceptance is not resignation. It is intelligence. It means acknowledging reality before responding to it. Resistance says, this should not be happening. Acceptance says, this is what is happening. From acceptance, right action arises. Example from the book. If you are sick, denying it creates suffering. Accepting it allows healing to begin. Real-life example. You lose something important. Fighting reality adds emotional pain. Acceptance creates clarity. Eckhart Tolle explains that acceptance transforms situations because it removes inner conflict. You are no longer divided against life. You are aligned with it. Presence also changes how you relate to other people. When you are present, you listen without waiting to respond. You see without labeling. You speak without defending. Relationships become spaces of awareness instead of ego battles. The ego wants to be right. Presence wants to be real. This shift alone can transform communication. Tolle reminds us that presence is felt by others. You do not need to say anything. Your stillness speaks. This is why truly present people feel grounding, calming, safe. They are not trying to get anywhere. They are already here. Eckhart Tolle explains that true freedom is not the freedom to do whatever you want. It is freedom from the inner voice that constantly demands more success, more security, more certainty, more control. This voice is never satisfied because it lives in time. It believes fulfillment exists somewhere else, somewhere ahead, somewhere after the next achievement. Presence reveals the truth. Fulfillment does not exist in time. It exists in being. When you are present, you stop postponing life. You stop waiting for conditions to change. You stop living in preparation mode. Life is no longer something that begins later. It is happening now. This realization changes everything. You still have goals. You still take action. But your sense of self is no longer tied to results. You act because action is needed, not because your worth depends on it. Eckhart Tolle calls this inner freedom. The ego cannot comprehend this freedom, because the ego is built on lack. It believes something is missing, and it promises completion in the future. But the future never arrives. It is always imagined, never experienced. Stillness is what reveals this illusion. Stillness is not created. It is uncovered. It is what remains when mental noise quiets, when resistance ends, when attention rests fully in the present moment. You may still hear sounds. You may still feel sensations. But inwardly there is openness, spaciousness, ease. This stillness is not separate from awareness. It is awareness itself. Eckhart Tolle explains that when you become aware of stillness, you begin to notice that thoughts lose their authority. They still appear, but they no longer define reality. Thoughts become tools, not masters. This changes your relationship with emotion. Emotions still arise, but they are no longer interpreted as problems. Fear becomes a sensation, not a prophecy. Sadness becomes a movement of energy, not an identity. Anger becomes heat, not a justification. Presence allows emotions to complete themselves. Most suffering exists because emotions are resisted, judged, or turned into stories. When emotions are allowed without interpretation, they dissolve naturally. This is emotional intelligence, not control, not suppression. Awareness. Eckhart Tolle explains that fear is always about the future. It imagines scenarios, projects outcomes, anticipates loss. In the now, fear has no foundation. There may be physical danger, but psychological fear depends on thought. Presence brings clarity. You see what needs to be done, and you do it, without panic, without drama. This is the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is unconscious. It is driven by the past, by conditioning, by pain. Response is conscious. It arises from presence. It is appropriate, measured, clear. As presence deepens, life begins to feel less heavy. Not because it becomes easier, but because resistance ends. You stop arguing with reality. You stop wishing the moment away. You stop turning life into a mental problem. Eckhart Tolle refers to this as alignment with the now. When you are aligned, action flows naturally. There is focus without tension, movement without anxiety, effort without struggle. You do what is needed. Then you let go. Psychological time dissolves in this state. The past is no longer carried as identity. It becomes memory, information, experience. The future is no longer used as salvation. It becomes intention, direction. The now becomes your home. This understanding deeply transforms how you experience aging. The body changes. Energy fluctuates. The mind accumulates memories. But awareness remains untouched. You begin to sense a dimension within you. That does not age. That does not decay. That does not depend on form. Eckhart Tolle explains that this realization also changes your relationship with death. Death is the dissolution of form, not the end of life. Life expresses itself through countless forms. Forms appear. Forms disappear. Awareness remains. When you know yourself as awareness, the fear of death weakens. You still value life. You still care deeply. But you are no longer psychologically threatened by impermanence. This creates compassion. You see that every being is navigating change, loss, uncertainty. Presence reveals shared humanity. This is why kindness arises naturally in presence, not as a moral rule, but as recognition. You recognize yourself in others, beyond roles, beyond beliefs, beyond stories. Separation dissolves. Eckhart Tolle reminds us that awakening is not an extraordinary achievement. It is the most ordinary thing. It is simply living without resistance. You eat. You walk. You speak. You listen. Fully. Without needing the moment to lead somewhere else. Gratitude arises quietly. Not as excitement, but as depth. Joy appears. Not as stimulation, but as inner ease. Even pain, when it arises, is met with space. It is felt directly, without narrative, without identity. And because it is not resisted, it completes itself. Suffering ends not when pain disappears, but when pain is no longer personalized, when it is no longer used to define who you are. What remains is peace, not dramatic, not dependent, not fragile, a peace that is stable, grounded, alive. This peace does not come from controlling life. It comes from meeting life fully, from no longer leaving the present moment. This is not a belief, not a philosophy, not an idea. It is an experience, available now. This is the power